Welcome to Playing with Fire, the podcast for people who are ready to custom build their love.
We're talking about non-monogamy, however you design it, as an individuation opportunity.
Want to leave the default and make your life spectacularly you? You're in the right place.
Hi.
Hey there.
So we have a question from one of our U cohort people, and it's about individualism and what it is to be a person in relationship. Okay, I'm finding that I'm very curious about that line that exists between being an individual in a relationship and being selfish. Has anyone found what clearly differentiates the two?
Well, I love this question.
That's great.
And I've watched this particular person take their relational exploration so seriously. So I'm grateful for the question because it's also demonstrating how far they've come in the 18 months that I've known them, the difference in how they're approaching their relationships. It's not just approaching them differently, but being able to articulate what's going on, what's coming up for them. So as I hear that question, at core, it's about, am I the asshole? But also, it's how do I know whether I am doing my best to be an autonomous individual? How do I know that I am actually walking my individuation path versus when I might just be being selfish or falling into tendencies that could be labeled as hyper-individualistic? And I think it's an important question because we have a whole episode on enmeshment. I'll make sure that that's linked in this one, because I think when I think about hyper-individualism, I always posit it as, okay, I can differentiate that from enmeshment pretty easily, because hyper-individualism is about getting what I want because I want it. Like the want being fulfilled is its own ends, and any means to getting that want filled could be understood from a hyper-individualistic perspective as necessary and okay. Enmeshment tends to be about falling into patterns where we are subverting our needs and wants and living sort of inside of each other's systems. And so I can't want this unless you want it, and then you can't want it unless I want it. And now we're so tightly connected that we can't actually experience things differently. So when we're talking about trying to tell whether someone is acting in an individualistic way, what rises to the top for me is this harmful to my relationships? Is this harmful to my capacity to be a good person for other people to relate to? And that's going to have a lot to do with what's the purpose of this relationship. Because, I was thinking about how I have some friends, they're not super close, but some friends who I find to be incredibly individualistically minded. Most of them are from other parts of my life, like other versions of me, earlier versions of me. I find their motivations to be quite individualistic in that they don't appear to think about or take into account how what they're asking for and what they're doing will impact others. And for the scope of the relationship that I have with them, it's okay. I understand that they are not people who are taking me into account, and I'm not building a life with them where I'm relying on them. Now, I have a different level of thought about this. When we take a societal look, that is still problematic, right?
Yeah, it is. I think of it as this hyper-individualism is, I think of it as, if I'm acting in a hyper-individualistic sort of way, I'm prioritizing my autonomy over everybody else's. And I definitely see that reflected in our society. I mean,
American
United
exceptionalism.
States,
Hi.
presence on the world stage has that exact thing. And yeah, American exceptionalism. So
And which is one of our core cultural complexes. This has been well discussed by some incredible writers, both of a depth psychological and non-depth psychological bent, where American exceptionalism, the idea that there is something inherently better about us, puts us in a reference frame of the individual, and individualistic thinking is just correct or
yeah,
more correct than other
yeah.
ways, which of course is antithetical to
Community.
other ways of relating
Yeah,
in the world, and you and I operate within that. So we can't
yeah,
escape it. We operate within it, so we have to be mindful of the biases that we have as we discuss this. And I feel some discomfort talking about it, but also I don't know another thing that we can do other than discuss how, at a social level, hyper individualism has led us to a place where things are not going well for the majority of people.
yeah,
That
yeah.
sucks. Um, and when you said you think of hyper individualism as, prioritizing my autonomy over, I wasn't sure what you were going to say. And then you said over other people's. And that's really interesting because when we talk about autonomy in a non-monogamous context, we're often talking about like, right, so let's be autonomous individuals. And you and I started our first triad with that exact premise. We will be three adults living in a household together, raising children together, loving each other and caring for each other. Okay, cool. Except we weren't prioritizing the well-being of our unit yet. We were
Yep.
really struggling
Yeah.
with that. And one of the places where we were consistently running into problems was totally in autonomy being prioritized. And at
Yep.
any given moment, the idea that there even is a way to prioritize your autonomy and my autonomy while also taking accountability for how we impact each other.
Right. And that's so
And it
I
led to the breakdown of that system really quickly.
yes, it did.
We wound up, it was an unsustainable system, because the prioritization was on autonomy, and the way that we were talking about it was largely around everyone is free to make their own decisions, except
Yep.
we weren't accounting for power.
Right. Well, yes.
We weren't.
So
Not at that time.
I
We
like
are now.
thinking about the structure of words and where they come from and what I think they mean. And I love the word autonomy because it, it, the etymology is it means you name yourself, which I think of as like you define yourself. It's what individuation is shooting for, is that I know who I am, I know my name, I know how I show up in the world, and I'm trying to be as authentic as I can to that. Great. The individualism is almost like an insecure form of that where I define myself by others, not by just what comes out of me. Like I, so some of the hyper individualistic behaviors, like um, just not helping. Like, no, I have my resources. I'm not going to share my
Not
resources
showing
because
mutual
I'm
aid
not showing mutual aid because I'm taking care of myself. Um, it
well,
it
it's
does.
short-sighted.
It's short sighted. That's what I was going to say. It breaks down automatically because we are not unconnected to each other.
So you said it seemed like an insecure version of autonomy. I would say it seems like there's an immaturity, and I don't
Okay.
mean
Yeah.
this in a
I like that.
disparaging way. I mean literally, like, as children develop, they go through phases where they want to do it themselves. And those are very
Right.
important
Yeah.
phases when they want
Hmm.
to buckle their seatbelt themselves and they want to tie their shoe themselves. And this slows down the group, and it's really frustrating for their older siblings. And how how can you make this work for everyone becomes a question, because their need for autonomy is real. They need to assert that. Otherwise, they won't learn to care for themselves, and they won't learn to take responsibility for themselves. However, there are other phases, and we don't see this in Western psychology talked about as much, but the phases where we learn to rely on each other again from a mature standpoint. This is something that I think we actually have to, white Western psychology has to look beyond itself, because we're not good at this. This is a problem in our psychological frameworks. The idea that we are able to be separate at all, right? And some of us work around it in our spiritual life. Like we get to a spot where we're like, oh right, I am one with the universe. I am here. I know I'm connected to everyone. But then in the practical world of,
Yeah.
yep, but can I ask others for help? Can I ask others to sacrifice something of their comfort for me? And a lot of that, I find it boils down to, am I willing to then be asked? Right. And this is where
Am I willing to be asked? Yeah.
hyper-individualism can be this. It can be reactive to a lot of different things that have happened, but I think of it as a survival strategy that probably has worn out its welcome, especially if you're wanting to build um, a a loving relationship with multiple others, right? Where you really there's a level of community to it inherent. Is I don't know if I don't know that I can be trusted in my community, and I don't know that I trust others in my community. If I'm reactive, it might be that comes right out of my childhood, that I did not feel it was safe to need others, that I did not feel, or that I was consistently overwhelmed. Perhaps I had a parent, a caregiver, who consistently needed me to supply their needs, to meet their needs. Or maybe I had a sibling who soaked up the lion's share of the attention in our family. Um, there's there are lots of reasons why we might develop the strategy of walling ourselves off from others. And I look at our own big family. We have 7 kids, and I see how, yep, some of them have created some bubble around them, and I can see it makes sense. It
Yeah.
makes sense. I have
As
so much compassion for this.
yeah, as a strategy for navigating their particular experiences, and now you have to, like,
And then what?
have
Because
to,
we
and then what? Like you said, it's outworn its welcome. No strategy is applicable to all contexts.
and
So
as we as we work to develop strategies to live in a world that we actually want to live in, because there's an imaginal quality to this too. When someone is struggling with hyper individualism, and I have definitely struggled with this, because it's such a productive strategy if you were taught to care for everyone else first. It is such a productive strategy to say, well, then I will also make sure I take care of just myself. I'm not going to count on anyone else. And that is rewarded in our culture, but it really breaks down when we start to face the reality that we will all age. We will all lose ability and capacity over time. Our capacities will change, and we're all different. Acknowledging that also, it asks us to stand and truly look at how bereft we are
yeah,
of community and of relation. And that is incredibly painful. I find it painful every time I like it's actually
it's painful
it's
now.
painful right now,
Hmm.
thinking about how, uh, as much as I keep working to build my friendships, my community, my polycule, my all of that, the the tendencies toward hyper individualism and the idea that we can and should take care of our own needs, meet our own needs, and not need anyone else. It's
Yeah.
It requires immense imagination. That's where I was headed. It
Okay.
requires immense imagination to imagine that others want to meet my needs, that others
Mm.
want to be in healthy relation, and that they are not over functioning every time we relate, right? There's like a guardedness against enmeshment that
Yep.
then creates this bounce back. Oh, it's like taking Afrin for too long. You use Afrin, it keeps those passages clear, and then you stop taking Afrin. It's like a nasal decongestant that you spray right in your nose. And then if you stop taking it, the bounce back is that your nasal passages just completely close up. There's a bounce back effect to either end of the spectrum from enmeshment to hyper-individualism. And neither of them truly meets my need for being an autonomous, individuating human within the context of community.
Yeah. And it's not it's not it. Let me put this in a very direct way. It's complex. The situation of being an autonomous person in a community is complex. And one of the best ways I heard it described is um, back from my work in the nature community a lot of years ago, and I've been carrying this one around with me. So we all have a responsibility to take care of the community. We individuals are also part of the community. So we have as much of a responsibility to take care of ourselves as everyone else. There isn't actually a difference. I have the same responsibility to take care of you as me. It and 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 then the complexity comes in because how do we prioritize? How do we allocate
And we
resources?
have different needs.
And we have different needs. That is really important.
So
Yeah.
this is reminding me too of Melina Williams Haas has that great concept of the prime directive in a power differential relationship, in a negotiated power dynamic, talking about the idea of if the and I believe the words I'm paraphrasing here. You can easily look it up. I'll make sure it's linked. Um, if you are in a master slave relationship in a power dynamic, I mean, in a kink setting, let's be really clear, in a kink setting, and you've negotiated that, well, then if the slave is the master's property and the slave's job is to care for the master's property, then the slave needs to make sure that they are caring for themselves. And that means protecting themselves, even up to protecting themselves from the master. And now, the language of master slave, I get it. Super triggering. Totally get it. Read Melina's work. Their work on racialization and kink is just par excellence. So good. But just taken at a very generous level of like, oh, right. I can't, I have to acknowledge that my autonomy, sometimes asserting my autonomy will mean that I hurt your feelings or I let you down. And sometimes you asserting your autonomy will hurt my feelings or let me down. There may be some harms that happen. And if we could zoom out somehow and see the bigger picture, we might be able to feel into how, yes, but in the larger scale, am I also exercising my autonomy to care for you, to care for me, to care for you, to care for others? And I think for me, when I get into habits where I am putting myself and specifically my wants first, I tend to feel like, oh, I must be bad. That must be bad. Other people might not feel that way. And that comes from my personal history with the idea of meeting my needs and my wants. Um, we're all gonna, you said, we're all individuals. Yep, we are. This is different for
Yes.
everyone. So there's no right amount. But going back to the original question, how do we tell the difference between when someone is being selfish and when they're um, practicing healthy autonomy? I'm not sure that we can look at a single instance and really understand that. Like in a single instance, there are so many, there's life is complex and there's so many different details and nuances and way to look at a situation that I'm not totally sure I could understand. I might be able to look in hindsight and say, well, knowing the outcome, I can see that your decision, oh, I prioritized graduate school over being here as the stay-at-home parent, right? And while I was doing it, it felt very selfish. Now, many years later, I can see what that has done for me as an individual and for our family as a whole. And it's easy for me to be able to say, that was me asserting my autonomy. That wasn't selfish. But what if the outcome hadn't been this? What if the outcome had been that I regretted my grad school, or that I regretted the time away, or that it left me in massive debt, and I didn't like what I was doing, and I hated my career? Would I look back and say, "Oh, I was being selfish then because I did this thing, and it was
And
just for me, and it hurt other people. It took something away from other people, and so therefore it must have hurt them." And so I think I'm just getting at, like, my imagination of it while I'm doing the act is limited. I can look at the outcomes I think will come, but until we live through it, I'm not sure that we would know whether a particular single action or decision is actually, falls into the category of selfish or autonomous. But also that's because it's subjective and it's contextual.
yeah, that's what I was going to ask if this landed for you, that you can't say whether something is selfish or not without the context.
Yeah.
Any single action or even series of actions can't be classified as selfish without the context.
Right.
The
We're in a
um
Les Mis moment here. Is stealing
yeah,
bread a crime?
yeah.
Like we're in that moment. We
And what are
have to
the
know the
implications? Who did you steal it from? What was their situation? You have to know so much.
right. And most
Um
of the time, we're not going to have all the details to come to a true conclusion.
no, because we can't, life must be lived forwards, can only be understood backwards.
And so, what do we do with? So, I think there's two ways for me to look at this. I wonder whether the person asking the question was saying, "Hey, I'm wondering whether I'm being selfish or practicing healthy autonomy,"
Mhm.
or whether they were like, "Can't tell whether my partner is
Oh
being
yeah.
selfish
Mhm.
or whether they're practicing healthy autonomy." Or knowing their particular situation, I can't tell whether my ex partner is being selfish or passing or using healthy autonomy, because I know that those situations are all in that person's life. And that's that's fascinating, because I can imagine trying to see myself in the best possible light. And from my standpoint as the actor in my life, the creator in my life, like, I might see myself as either the hero or the villain. And I might paint my actions as either selfish
Yep.
or autonomous based on my perception of my self concept. Um, Depending on how I feel about my partner, I might paint their actions as either um, beneficial to their overall individuation path or as selfish brattiness. And depending on the relationship with my ex partner, yep, I might totally imagine it as being one way or the other. So my judgment of these things, one, it's subjective, but two, it's going to have a lot to do with how I feel about the people, which is like an emotional context as well as the details context.
So another way to say that then is that you can classify your behavior based on the story you tell about it,
Yeah,
which
sure.
takes into account all the different contexts. And because um, full disclosure, I heard you saying, I can I can evaluate my ex's behaviors, and then I was thinking, yeah. So how does that go? Do I give them the benefit of the doubt? Do I not? At that point, I've started telling a story.
Yeah. We've started
And
making
that
meaning, telling a
story,
story about
yeah,
it.
tells me whether this is selfishness or malice or, whatever. That's my story. And I get to decide whether to tell it and how
So
to.
this is a great place to exercise the lens of multiplicity. So what if there is no answer? From a philosophical perspective, I don't think that there can be an answer here, right? There's no ultimate truth because I I don't believe that I am the arbiter of truth for even my own universe. Like I'm not holding myself as like the judge and jury of every action that passes in front of me. What if we, instead of being attached to that story, we accept that there are multiple ways to interpret? There are multiple stories that could
Yes.
be told. So I'm thinking about the way I talk about our entry point. Like you and I become a romantic item. I have no idea what to call that particular moment, right? We become a romantic item, and I can tell a story in which you are a hero or a villain at every moment that unfold over the next
Right.
few years.
Hmm.
I can do the same for myself. I can do the same for our exes. Um, what can I hold the multiplicity of those stories? And that's an imaginal skill. That is a depth psychological skill to be able not even to say what is right or wrong, but like, wow, okay, there are a lot of ways to see this. And my next question would be, which one serves my individuation? Which one serves, and for me, that's about which one serves me being authentic to myself, not self abandoning, but also not abandoning myself to the victim role and deciding that
Yes.
just because something hurt me, I am by necessity then the victim of this story. And so I guess a shorter way to say that would be, what if someone is being selfish and also I'm not the victim of their selfishness? Or what if someone is being selfish and there is a much greater good that will be served over the long term? And if we can stay in that space of holding those multiple stories all at once, we're probably in good shape to actually honor the other's autonomous capacity. And it's hard to hold multiple stories. When we're tired, we're not very well resourced to hold that multiplicity. So if you're struggling with this, I would suggest seeing if maybe can you get better resourced? Can you sleep? Can you nourish your body? Can you regulate your nervous system through movement or um, there's all sorts of methods for that. Can you find some co-regulation with someone who's feeling safe enough for you right now? And from that place, do you feel more able to see without trying to discern what is the truth? Can you just hold the tension of like, wow, there are multiple ways to look at this. I may like some of them, I may not like some of them. What if I don't have to decide? What if I don't have to label this story?
I really appreciate all of that. Yeah. So, what are you going to do with your stories, and do they align with your goals for yourself?
Right.
And what you said about someone may be being selfish. That doesn't mean I have to sign up to be a victim of that selfishness.
Yep.
That's I love that. Which right away, that's taking control of the story.
Yeah, if you're using the drama triangle as a model, a mental model for this, in the drama triangle, there's a victim, there's a villain, and there is a rescuer. And the victim spot is the one that I am most likely to occupy when I'm seeing someone else being selfish. And the move to get out of that is to move into the empowerment triangle, the empowerment dynamic, where I go from victim to creator of my experience. And I may not be able, the villain now can shift from being a villain to a challenger. I may not like their perspective. I may not like what they're choosing to do. So, how do I want to create my life in response to what they're doing? And this is where I found myself from a practical standpoint reimagining relationships, ending some relationships, learning how to co-parent with far lower contact than I initially imagined because that was actually in best service to everybody involved. Like doing things that I initially did not imagine because I wanted to move out of victim mode and into creator mode. Um, if you're interested in the drama triangle, you can easily Google it. That is Karpman's theory. It's, I think, 1969 it was originally developed. It's been around for ages. It's easily accessible and really, really easy mental model to use to step out of moments of victimhood, or when you are finding yourself constantly rescuing others or being cast in the villain mode. Ken, I think we've answered this question as best as it can be answered. It's a
Yeah,
really philosophical
it is very,
conundrum.
yes, it is. And
But I
the practic
appreciate the
yeah, it's a great question. And the remaining follow-up question I have is what um for you, what do you think of as the relationship between the word selfish and hyper-individualism? Are they synonyms? Are they related?
So I have seen people. I think the word selfish. If we want to break it down, I have heard. There's somebody whose work I've enjoyed in the past. Oh, her first name is Nikita, and I am blanking on her last name. I will remember it as soon as we're done. She wrote a book called Selfish, where she was really talking about selfish as in centering the self. I am centering the self. The reclamation of that word, I understand. I'm not sure that it's necessary for me. I don't personally feel the necessity of reclaiming selfish, but I haven't had it hurled at me as an accusation a lot. So if you have been in a place where other people have hurled that word as an accusation, I absolutely reclaim that word. If selfish is about centering the self, let's talk about the capital S self. Centering your individuality is not the same as centering every one of your wants and whims at
Yeah,
every moment
those
above
are very different.
everyone
Hmm.
else's. So hyper individualism tends to be it's a coping strategy. It's a coping mechanism designed by a child, right? Like it's designed in your infancy and child years to cope with the fact that your needs aren't being met. And from that perspective, what I would say is it could be seen as a synonym for selfishness, but it could be that you need reparenting, which you can only really provide to yourself, but you can also get support from a trusted counselor to do some reparenting work. And that has been absolutely, hands down, one of the best decisions I've ever made is engaging with a therapist who I could get really solid parental transference to,
Hmm.
and get reparenting energy going on. And I've had two now who I find to be truly excellent examples. And I've had one man and one woman who've been able to provide this reparenting energy in the therapeutic container. And that has let me step out of the idea that being in a selfish mood is necessarily bad, because that might be a child part of me. And if that's a child part of me, how can I learn to work with that part without acting out in immature ways that are anti-relational to my grown-up needs, wants, and
Right.
and goals?
Well, thank you for diving into that, and I love that your answer is very much in the spirit of this conversation we're having, which is to say it's philosophical. There's no straightforward answer because we are members of a community. Everybody has their own stories. Everybody has multiple stories that they're figuring out and dealing with. And yeah, so is it selfish versus in service to your growth? Could be both. And that's kind
Maybe
of up to you to tell the story.
let's talk about context, story, and scale. How far
Context
out are
story.
you going
Yeah.
to zoom?
Right. Beautiful.
And for all of that, I'm super glad for the question,
Oh yeah.
because the the opportunity we all have, in particular in um, Western industrialized cultures, to grapple with this. This is how we change. This is how we change the future.
And
So
so if
let us grapple.
let us grapple. And so if you have any thoughts along these lines or want to talk about it more, we have our regular Ask Me Anythings. And so you can go to joliehamilton.com/AMA and sign yourselves up for the next one.
There's no one right way to design your relationship. And lots of people, actually about 25%, according to a recent national survey, are interested in some type of open relationship. But how do you know if you are ready to open up happily? Not everyone is, and that's no problem. I've got a 60-second quiz that will give you the answer. And even better, you'll walk away with your next step, whether you're good to go or not so much when it comes to opening up. And this is no BuzzFeed nonsense. I personally designed this quiz from my years of academic research. Go to joliequiz.com. That's JOLIQUIZ.com and find out if you're ready to open up happily and what to do if you are or if you're not.